It was one of those rare, perfect Saturday mornings when the sun hit my porch just right. Warm enough to wake the roses, but not yet hot enough to make me regret living in the suburbs. The coffee was strong, the air was still, and the world was quiet. I had just started trimming the edge of my lawn, humming to myself when I heard the unmistakable click of heels on concrete. That sound could only mean one thing in this neighborhood: trouble wearing perfume. I turned, and there she was, Karen, the reigning queen of our homeowners association. Her blonde bob didn't move as she marched down the sidewalk like she owned every inch of pavement. She had that same clipboard she always carried, the one she used like a weapon. I'd seen her wield it to measure fence heights, note down unauthorized decorations, and once to photograph a neighbor's offensive gnome collection. She wasn't technically supposed to enforce anything outside the HOA, but she didn't let details get in her way. I gave her a polite nod and went back to trimming. I lived just outside the AO boundary, literally one house past the jurisdiction line. My property isn't under their rules, their fees, or their nonsense. It's freedom. Sweet, unregulated grass as long as I want freedom. Good morning, she chirped in that too bright voice that always means bad news is coming. Morning, I said without looking up. She stopped right at the edge of my driveway and scanned my lawn like a tax auditor. You know, she said, tapping her clipboard with her pen, your grass looks a little long. I turned off the trimmer. Not really. City says anything under 8 inches is fine, but she pursed her lips. Well, that might be city standards, but this area has an appearance to maintain. I smiled. Oh, you mean the HO area? That starts across the street. I'm not in it. Her nostrils flared slightly. The first sign of a brewing storm. Technically, she said, for visually adjacent to the HOA. People driving in might assume your home is part of the community. I blinked. Visually, she nodded, like she'd just said something profound, as, the board has discussed it before. We have to think about property values. Unkempt lawns, non-standard mailboxes, and her eyes landed on my garden gnome. Tacky yard ornaments can give the wrong impression. I couldn't help but laugh. You're serious. If I'm always serious about community standards, she said, squaring her shoulders. I'm sure you'd want to be a good neighbor, sure. I said. Being a good property. Her jaw tightened. We'll see what the board thinks. I gave her a friendly wave. You do that, as she stood there a second longer, probably trying to come up with something else to say, but when I turned the trimmer back on, she finally spun around and stomped off. I thought that was the end of it. It should have been. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that a Karen never leaves a perceived insult unanswered. Later that afternoon, I was inside catching up on some emails when I heard a loud thunk outside. The unmistakable sound of a car door slamming. I looked out the window and froze. Parked right across my driveway, blocking it completely. Of course, it was Alexis, with a sticker that said, Proud HOA member. I could see her through the windshield, casually scrolling her phone like she hadn't just decided to wage psychological warfare through parking. I walked outside calm but already irritated. Hey, you're blocking my driveway, I said, motioning to the car. She rolled down her window slowly, like a villain in a bad movie. Oh, this isn't a driveway, she said sweetly. It's unmarked. I pointed to the obvious concrete slope leading up to my garage. It's my driveway, as she shrugged. Well, the curb isn't painted red. That means it's community parking. Fits my property, I repeated, enunciating every word. You're trespassing. She said, looking around. Looks public to me. There's no sign that says otherwise. I don't need a sign, I said, trying to keep my voice level. It's private property. You're on it, she smiled. That smug, condescending kind of smile that only someone drunk on small-scale authority can manage. Well, then, she said, you can always tow me. Her tone made it clear she didn't believe I'd dare. Go ahead, she added, folding her arms over her chest. Call the tow truck. Let's see how that goes. I stared at her for a moment, weighing my options. On one hand, I could argue. On the other, she had just handed me an open invitation to teach her a lesson she wouldn't forget. You sure about that? I asked. Positive, she said. You can't do anything. This is a community street. My husband's on the HO board, and we've already checked the city maps. I couldn't help it. I laughed. You really think the HO trumps city property laws? She just smirked and leaned back in her seat. You'll regret making trouble with me. I know everyone around here. Not the tow truck driver, I said under my breath. What was that? Nothing, I said, backing up toward my porch. Enjoy your parking spot. I went inside and peeked through the blinds. She stayed there for a while, just sitting, occasionally glancing up at my house like she expected me to storm out in defeat. I didn't. Instead, I opened my laptop and started pulling up city parking ordinances. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Parking in front of or blocking a residential driveway is an immediate tow violation. No warnings required. The HOA doesn't have jurisdiction over my address. I grinned. Oh, this was going to be fun. For the next half hour, I let her bask in her little victory. She even got out at one point to take photos of my lawn, like she was collecting evidence for some imaginary tribunal. Then she sat back down in her SUV, sipped her drink, and called someone on speaker. Yeah, she was saying, "Fizz one of those anti-HOA types. His lawn's a mess. I'm gonna get him cited somehow." My block took my own photos. Her car, my block driveway, the house number visible in the frame. Then I made the call. When I came back out, she waved at me mockingly. "Change your mold." "Nope," I said. "Just follow her." Grin widened. That's the spirit. If only she knew. I leaned against the porch rail, sipping my now cold coffee, and watched as the afternoon sun dipped lower. Somewhere in the distance, a truck engine rumbled. It was faint at first, but as it grew louder, Karen's expression began to change. She glanced in her rearview mirror, frowned, then looked back at me. "What's going on?" she asked. I just smiled. "Oh, you'll see." She squinted at me, clearly starting to suspect that her little power play might not end the way she imagined. I could almost see the gears turning behind those oversized sunglasses, but it was too late. The sound of the approaching diesel engine was unmistakable now, big, deliberate, and coming straight down the street. Karen's hand froze halfway to her phone. The tow truck had arrived, and I couldn't wait to see her face when she realized I'd done exactly what she dared me to do. The tow truck rumbled down the street like a mechanical beast, slow and steady, the kind of sound makes everyone peek out their curtains. The driver, a broad-shouldered man in a faded blue cap, pulled up beside the curb, scanning the house numbers. He stopped right in front of my driveway, exactly where Karen's white Lexus gleamed in all its entitled glory. Karen, who had been lounging in the driver's seat, immediately sat up. I could see the confusion flicker across her face, then quickly twist into suspicion. She rolled her window down halfway and called out, "Excuse me, what you doing?" The tow driver ignored her at first, hopping out of the truck with a practiced motion, clipboard in hand. He looked at me. "You the homeowner," I said. "That's my driveway she's blocking." And he nodded once, glanced at the Lexus, and whistled softly. "All right. You got the photo proof. Right here." I handed him my phone with the timestamp pictures. He studied them for a second, then jotted something on his clipboard. "Perfect. City ordinance violation. Driveway obstruction. You did good calling this in." Karen was out of the car by now, her sunglasses perched on her head like a battle helmet. She snapped, storming toward us. "This is a mistake." Storming toward us. "This is community parking." The tow driver raised an eyebrow, completely unfazed. "Ma'am, this is a residential driveway. You're blocking access to private property. That's an automatic tow." She crossed her arms. No, Anita. I know the rules." "Then you should know the city's rules matter more," he said dryly. "Van, the city says you're in the wrong." She spun toward me, her voice rising. "You actually called them." I gave her my calmest smile. "Well, you told me to tow you." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "That was a figure of speech." I said. "You might want to be more literal next time." The tow driver chuckled quietly as he lowered the metal arm of the truck, chains clinking as it slid under the front of her Lexus. Karen's composure cracked like thin ice. "If you touch my car," she said, pointing an accusatory finger, "I will have your job, mister." The driver didn't even look up. "Get in line, lady." "You wouldn't believe how often I hear that." "Mean it?" she shouted. "My husband is on the HOA board." "That's nice," he said. "The HOA doesn't own this street." She stood there, shaking with rage, while the truck lifted the front tires of her beloved SUV off the ground. Her voice cracked as she yelled, "You can't do this, Iowa." That made me laugh out loud, and I couldn't resist. "Yeah," I said. "Van, now you're the HOA without a car." Her head whipped toward me, eyes wide with disbelief that I'd actually said it. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "You don't know who you're messing with." "I'm guessing someone who's gonna have to Uber home," I said. The driver signed off on the paperwork, unbothered by the shouting. "All right, sir," he said to me. "This'll be towed to the city impound lot. She can pick it up there. Fines $450 plus." Turned reg. Karen's face turned red. $450. "That's outrageous. Should have parked legally," he said, climbing back into his truck. She darted forward, waving her arms. "Wait, I can move it now. I'll move it." He shook his head. "Once it's hooked, it's gone, ma'am. You can argue with the city." Her voice broke into an incredulous shriek. "This is harassment." I've restarted the engine. The chains tightened. Her SUV lifted higher. Karen's jaw dropped. "This isn't over," she screamed, pointing at me. You're going to be sorry. But I doubt it. I said, but your car will be. The truck rolled away, dragging the Lexus slowly down the street while Karen stood in the middle of the road, hands on her head, watching her empire on wheels disappear. The sight was so absurd that even a couple of my neighbors came out, pretending just to get a better look. Mrs. Jensen from across the street called out, "What happened?" I shrugged. "Parking dispute," Karen whirled on me. "You liar. You're making me look like some kind of villain." "Karen," Mrs. Jensen said gently, "you blocked his driveway." "That's not the point," Karen barked, then caught herself and stormed off toward her house, muttering something about calling a lawyer. I went back inside, poured myself another cup of coffee, and sat by the window, enjoying the peace that settled after the storm. For the first time all day, I could breathe again. The sweet sound of victory was the faint echo of a tow truck engine fading down the street. Over the next few days, I half expected retaliation, maybe a complaint letter, maybe her husband showing up to demand an apology. But nothing happened. At least, not right away. Instead, there was silence, a suspicious, tight silence that made me think she was plotting something. Then, 3 mornings later, I saw a bright yellow notice staked into the grass at the edge of my driveway. It read Notice C. No parking zone if CITENFORC. I smiled. The city must have decided to make it official after processing the tow report. I hadn't even asked for it. The bold black letters were like a badge of honor. An hour later, as I was taking out the trash, I heard the crunch of tires. Karen's Lexus, retrieved, rolled slowly past. She didn't stop this time. She just glared at me through her window, lips pressed so tight they almost disappeared. Her car idled for a few seconds like she wanted to say something, but then she drove off. From that day on, she never parked near my house again. Not even close. She'd circle the block, park on her side of the street, and glare daggers whenever I was outside. Sometimes I'd wave cheerfully. That only made her scowl deeper. A week later, a newsletter mysteriously appeared in my mailbox, despite me not being on their delivery list. The front page had an article titled, "Maintaining Neighborhood Standards C. The Importance of Harmony." The author was, of course, Karen H. The piece talked about uncooperative neighbors and people who don't respect community values. I couldn't help laughing. She was waging a written war now, so I decided to play along. Quietly, politely, and perfectly within my rights. I let my lawn grow exactly to the city's legal limit, 8 inches on the dot. I bought another gnome for my garden, this one holding a tiny, private property sign. And every time she drove by, I made sure the sprinklers were on just long enough to miss the edge of the sidewalk where she liked to walk her dog. Petty, maybe, but fair. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the neighborhood gold, I sat on my porch, sipping a cold drink, watching the calm suburban street that had once been her kingdom. Across the way, she was unloading groceries from her car, still shooting me dirty looks between bags. I raised my glass in a friendly salute. "Evening, Karen." She didn't answer. Just slammed her trunk shut about people like her. They can't stand losing control. But the truth is, she'd picked the wrong person to play HOA games with. I'd followed her rules to the letter, even when those rules weren't hers to give. Malicious compliance at its finest. And every no parakianig sign, I couldn't help smiling. Because it wasn't just a sign. It was a trophy. The quiet proof that sometimes, the best revenge isn't shouting or arguing or even winning an HOA vote. It's a tow truck and a well-timed smirk.